October 28, I woke up in a state of fear. I was feeling anxious and insecure because this was the second round of Brazilian presidential elections, and I knew how that could impact my future. The candidate that was ahead in the polls and had a high chance to win had shown all the characteristics that could make his mandate a threat to our lives. Since his first day running, Bolsonaro's comments have been against minority rights. He invalidated all the achievements that marginalized groups such as Black and indigenous people, women, and the LGBTQI community were able to gain in these past few years. Using anti-corruption as his flag, he showed up as a type of messiah who could save the country from bankruptcy, communism, and immorality. As crazy as it may sound, Bolsonaro's ideas won him millions of voters, almost worshippers who would follow whatever he says without question. Bolsonaro also got admirers, such as the white supremacist David Duke, who said, "He sounds like one of us." Among one of Bolsonaro's main actions is the removal of land rights of indigenous peoples and quilombolas, Maroon communities where millions of descendants of runaway slaves have lived since the 18th century. Bolsonaro is also against affirmative actions and any other kind of reparations to the Black population. Reparations that were conquered after more than 100 years since the abolition of slavery in Brazil. He doesn't believe in reparations because he doesn't believe that he or the country has any debt to the Afro-Brazilian community. Bolsonaro's discourse and approaches aren't simple or innocent. He talks about shooting those who oppose him and ending activism in the country. His words are a violent threat to those of us who represent any form of opposition to his tyranny. The summation of all these factors were the cause of my fear on that October 28. I was feeling as the personification of Bolsonaro's target. Later that night, my worst nightmare would become true. Bolsonaro won the election. And as I start crying and getting desperate about my future, my only consolation was to think about how our people have been resisting to all kinds of oppressions that we have faced so far. With more than 100 million Black people, represent more than 50% of the population, Brazil has the second largest Black population in the world, the first outside of Africa. The country used African enslaved workforce for more than 3 centuries and was the last country in the world to abolish slavery. Still, despite all these historical facts, Brazil insists on denying its racism and preaches the country as a mixed country without any form of racism. Far from the truth, the myth of racial democracy is still alive and it's impregnated in the mentality of most Brazilians. For years, the idea that Brazil was a racially harmonious country prevented the Afro-Brazilian community from demanding rights, giving the wrong impression that Afro-Brazilians were conformed and avoided fighting for justice. But this is a misconception, far from reality. Afro-Brazilians have always resisted oppression in different ways. Since the Middle Passage, through mothers who opted for abortion, or people who threw themselves in the ocean, to Quilombo's communities such as Palmares that housed runaway enslaved people who burned the master's house, escaped to the jungle, and create their own society for centuries. To riots such as Revolta dos Malês that organized themselves for freedom in the state of Bahia. To the abolitionists that pressured the Brazilian government to end slavery. To the priests who keep the secrets of African sacred traditions and develop new practice in Brazilian territories. All these practices were used by the Black population in Brazil as ways to searching for freedom and liberation. However, an outstanding form of Afro-Brazilian resistance comes in ways that aren't always perceived as so. You probably have seen these images before. Capoeira, samba, carnaval, jongo, maracatu, bailes blacks, among others, are all cultural expressions of Black resistance that take place all over Brazil. Through this practice, our ancestors were able to share stories, secrets, movements, tradition. Every social event was much more than that. It was a way to preserve our identity. At this point, you are probably wondering how everything started for me. Everything started with music. From my childhood, singing in the church choir, later as a teen being part of the worship team, to my father playing his Hey Charles vinyl. My life was all about music. It was also music who drove me for the hip hop for the first time. I heard a rhyme by Brazilian rap group Racionais MCs, and through that, I started a long journey to realize who I am. I understood the reality around me and rediscovered my identity as a Black woman. Since then, I started my journey with hip-hop. Hip-hop changed the life of my generation, saving the Black and poor youth from São Paulo, Brazil, for the kind of misconception that our country was given to us. Hip-hop impacted our community and showed us that we could be Black and proud. Through hip-hop, I found my path in life, and that took me all over the world until I arrived here. Hip-hop then became my dissertation topic, where I tell my story and the story of others who, like me, found in hip-hop a path of transformation, a tool of salvation from the damage that racism has been causing us. Recently, hip-hop artists got together to protest Bolsonaro and his threats to democracy.
Esse cramulhão aí, que não tem nada a ver com Deus, não está do seu lado, não está do meu lado, não está do nosso lado.
O amor emanado pelo hip-hop deu força para pretos, pobres, mulheres e a comunidade LGBT.
Bolsonaro age diretamente contra essas pessoas.
Representa uma ameaça aos nossos valores.
Por isso convocamos você do hip-hop.
Não podemos eleger um candidato que quer voltar no tempo.
Se ele quiser, que viaje para o passado sozinho.
This protest is a clear sign that the chaos that was installed through the election reminds us that we, as Afro-Brazilians, have always used our art and our bodies as forms of resistance. We resist to exist. I want to conclude my presentation stating that as cultural manifestations were important allies of the Afro-Brazilian community in the past, they are now and will be in the future fundamental for the resistance of our people, demonstrating that each one of our acts, steps, and words always had purpose and were tools of liberation which keep us alive. Obrigada.